All right, today we're going to break down this really complex 20-point peace plan for Gaza. There's a ceasefire, but it's fragile, and this new US-led proposal is, well, it's the biggest diplomatic push we've seen in years. But here's the real question. Is this a genuine blueprint for peace, or is it just another high-stakes gamble in a region that's already seen way too many of them fail? Let's get into it.
So to really get why this plan is such a big deal, you've got to understand the sheer scale of the crisis on the ground. I mean, after years of escalating conflict, by the middle of 2025, the situation was beyond dire. Huge parts of Gaza were literally uninhabitable. The health system had pretty much collapsed, and food insecurity was through the roof. This is the reality, the starting point, for any plan that hopes to succeed.
And with that absolutely devastating backdrop, we land on the one central question. After all these decades of failed attempts, of these repeated, heartbreaking cycles of violence, can this plan, this specific 20-point plan, finally be the one to break that cycle? Or are we just watching a repeat of the past?
To even begin to understand the plan's chances, we've got to look at how we got here. You know, the challenges this thing faces didn't just pop up overnight. They're tangled up in decades of history.
This timeline really tells the story, doesn't it? It starts with Israel's withdrawal back in 2005. Then, just 2 years later, Hamas takes control, which leads to this major political split between Gaza and the West Bank. And what came next? A long-standing blockade, a devastating series of wars, and then it all just boils over in that major escalation from 2023 to 2025. Each one of these events just made the humanitarian crisis deeper and hardened everyone's security positions.
And that brings us right up to late 2025. Yeah, a ceasefire's holding and some hostages have been released, but fragile is absolutely the word of the day here. Some aid is getting in, but it's nowhere near enough. And all those underlying political tensions between Israel, the different Palestinian factions, and all the regional players, they are as tense as they've ever been.
Okay, so that's the shaky ground this whole thing is built on. Now let's pop the hood and really look at the mechanics of the plan itself. What exactly is being proposed here?
At its heart, when you boil it all down, this plan is a trade, a really big one. The goal is to take this temporary pause in fighting and turn it into something long-term. And the deal is basically this: huge amounts of international money to rebuild Gaza, but in exchange for the disarmament of armed groups, bringing in an international security force, and setting up a whole new system of governance. Oh, and here's a key detail. It deliberately sidesteps the massive question of Gaza's final political status, kicks that can down the road.
So the entire thing really rests on these 5 big pillars, and they have to happen in order, kind of like dominoes. It all starts with making the ceasefire permanent. You do that through hostage and prisoner exchanges to try and build some confidence. That little bit of trust is supposed to open the door for the next huge step: demilitarization, where armed groups have to surrender their heavy weapons. To watch over all this, an international stabilization force comes in. And only then, and this is the absolute make-or-break part, does the reconstruction actually start. Because all that funding is conditional on those security goals being met. And finally, you get a new interim system of governance, all under international supervision.
And this right here, this is the most important thing to remember about the entire plan. It's all built on a security-first principle. Everything, and I mean everything, from rebuilding hospitals to getting the power back on, is tied to seeing verified progress on disarmament and stability. This is both the plan's greatest strength and, you guessed it, its biggest potential weakness.
Right, so we've got this security-first idea. Let's really dig into the massive risks and, the potential rewards, because this thing is absolutely a double-edged sword. And this is where it gets really interesting, when you lay out the two sides of this gamble. I mean, the best-case scenario is pretty obvious, right? The fighting stops, civilians are safer, and all that coordinated international money finally starts to rebuild things. For Israel, it could mean a real drop in attacks from Gaza. But look at the other side. The risks are huge. For a lot of Palestinians, having an international force and supervised governance could feel like another occupation, which just fuels more resentment. That international force, they could easily become a target themselves. And then you have the spoilers, any number of groups who actually benefit from chaos, who could try to blow the whole thing up.
And this quote from a humanitarian agency, it just hits the nail on the head when it comes to the biggest, most immediate danger. Tying life-saving stuff like food and medicine to political and security progress, that is a major red flag for aid groups. They're basically warning that it could make people suffer for longer if, or let's be honest, when the process hits a political snag.
So, the stakes couldn't be higher. What should you be watching for? Let's talk about what could happen next and the key signals in the news that'll tell us which way this is all heading.
So when you look at how this could all play out, analysts basically see three roads. You've got your worst case. The ceasefire completely collapses and it's back to widespread violence. Then you have the best case. The plan actually works and leads to real, lasting stability. But the baseline, the one that analysts think is most likely, is somewhere in the messy middle. A fragile, slow, step-by-step process. The ceasefire mostly holds, more aid gets in, but not enough, and all those big political questions just get kicked down the road again.
So, if you're trying to follow this at home, here are the 4 things you really need to keep an eye on. First, the stabilization force. Who's actually going to join it? Does it get a full UN mandate, or is it just a random coalition? Second, aid access. Is aid really flowing freely and quickly through all the crossings? Third, demilitarization. Can all the sides even agree on how to check that it's happening? And finally, politics. Watch out for any leadership changes, either in Israel's or among the Palestinians, that could just completely upend the whole deal.
So at the end of the day, when you add it all up, what's the verdict? It's pretty clear, really. This plan is a genuine attempt, a serious diplomatic effort, to break that cycle of violence. But its success depends on somehow navigating a minefield of political, security, and humanitarian tripwires. It is the very definition of a high-reward, high-risk plan. Success is possible, but it is absolutely not guaranteed.
Which leaves us right back where we started, with that one huge, lingering question. In the months and years to come, are we going to look back on this 20-point plan as the blueprint that finally brought some stability to Gaza? Or will it just be remembered as another failed gamble that accidentally triggered the next terrible round of conflict? Only time is going to tell.